how common do you think OnlyFans is amongst the average population of, let's say, women in their 20s? Because I've had men comment and say, oh, it seems like every woman's on OnlyFans. I don't think that's true, but I think it's fair to say it's definitely more than it ever has been. Like, basically women involved in sex work. Obviously, OnlyFans itself as a platform is pretty new.
I have no idea. I wish there were solid numbers on this, because the perception is so different between different people. Like, there are, if I'm hanging out with somebody who's like kind of a normal human being, a normie, if you will, who just like goes to school or is like working and is whatever. Like, some of them have like heard of OnlyFans because they're kind of like familiar with internet culture, and that's about it. And then I'll talk with other people who are like, oh yeah, like me and like all 3 of my friends are on OnlyFans and we all like do this, blah, 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 blah. I truly have no idea. I feel like it's hard to get a fix on it like anecdotally, because our friend groups are going to heavily dictate people's inclinations to go off and do this type of content, Like, if you were to ask me, if I was an idiot, you were to ask me how many people do YouTubers streaming, I'd be like, I don't know, probably like 10% of the population are like YouTubers or streamers.
Right, because
but like,
that's your social group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it's self-selecting.
And I feel like if you ask the average like Redpill or people that are like really far in one direction, like how many girls do you think have an OnlyFans? I think a lot of them would legitimately say probably 20 to 40%. I think a lot of people would say this for women under 30. I'm like, that number's probably really high, but maybe it's not. I don't know. It'd be nice to actually get like data on that, but I don't know if that's ever possible to get. Yeah.
It would be nice, because I mean, I'm in a social circle where everyone that I talk to on a day-to-day basis, we're all in, perpetually online. We all heard of OnlyFans, but I was on the Whatever podcast. That was my first time ever meeting someone who had an OnlyFans account. Like, all of my female friends, and my friends are basically only women. None of us have. I mean, I do feel like there's a selection bias. So do you think that the idea that we are so heavily focused on, and I do this too, I've done a ton of videos about OnlyFans, I think it's fascinating. Do you think that's actually almost skewing the perception that it's more common than it is, and therefore hurting gender relations?
Would it hurt gender relations? I don't know if it would hurt gender relations necessarily, unless you're like,
do you think OnlyFans hurts gender relations?
Why? It would depend on how many people are doing it, right?
Why would that matter? Or just like as a concept?
Okay. So here's something that I have a hard time sorting through. I don't know it's just hard to know. So one of the arguments that I hear a lot of men put forth when it comes to OnlyFans is that OnlyFans have corrupted women's brains, OnlyFans and social media, because women are able to get infinite validation from men who want to fuck them whenever they want. And that was never a thing in the past. But then when I talk to especially older women, what they'll say is, that's not true. Every single woman since she turns about 12 has had infinite offers for dick for the entirety of her life. Every single guy you meet will potentially at least want to if not more. So that attention and that type of like validation has literally always been there. And the internet stuff doesn't really change it that much, other than it adds kind of like a new dimension to it, which the internet has for like everything for everybody. So has OnlyFans like skewed or changed perceptions in relationships? I mean, I would say probably not, but if it has, I would say that it has insofar as like the internet in general has skewed and changed all of our perceptions about relationships. But backing up to that thing we said before, if like 50% of girls did OnlyFans, maybe that would affect it a lot more negatively. It's hard to say, but I will say something that's a little bit annoying is that it felt like porn on TV was okay, magazines was okay, video games was okay, internet was okay, but for some reason, as soon as women started to like kind of control it and earn all the money themselves, now it's literally like a society-ending plague that needs to be ended as soon as possible. I find that a little bit suspect. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess it depends on who you ask. Like, on the internet and on TV and in magazines was okay. I think there's a lot of people that would say it was not okay. But I mean, even if we say that, all right, people weren't as upset about magazines as they are things like OnlyFans, I think it's reasonable to say that, the abundance of something like pornography does matter. Like, there's a difference between saying you can buy material if you go out, if you buy a magazine, and it's just kind of like it's relatively vanilla, and it also usually if you're buying something like that, you're going to be consuming the same content and you're less likely to be desensitized to it, versus what we have going on right now. Like, I think it's fair to say that how we're dealing with pornography as a culture, as a society, is not something that we as a species have had to deal with. Like, what does your sexual drive look like when you basically have anything you could ever think of, and a lot of things you would never even imagine, at your fingertips 24/7? Like, I think it's reasonable to say that OnlyFans has been an escalation of a problem we've been seeing for a long time now, for generations, literally, which is that the increased availability of pornography. Like, I think I don't think it's fair to say this is just OnlyFans specific, but it's just online pornography in general, and OnlyFans is part of that. It absolutely, I think, is a different problem than generations previously have had to deal with. And I think it does contribute to worsening relations between men and men, because I feel women and men, because I feel like men more so now are seeing women like literally as a commodity that they can buy, where it's not just, oh, pornography in general is available to me. This woman's nudes specifically are probably available to me. I've had like people, online agencies, like reach out and ask if you have OnlyFans. Like, when did that become socially acceptable to ask a woman, hey, is there pornography of you I can buy? Because that's what's happening now. It's crazy.
I feel like there are parts I agree with, there's parts I disagree with. So one of the things I said before is I wonder how much OnlyFans is a problem versus just the internet in general. Like, I do agree that OnlyFans is kind of presenting, and maybe online in general is presenting kind of like unique challenges to people today. But when I brought up the thing that OnlyFans makes me really suspect about people's intentions, is because while people have always had a problem with, it's pretty rare outside of like very religious communities, and even at that, it wasn't the most common thing, to find like young men that are these staunch advocates against pornography outside of very religious communities. And I feel like that's driven by something a little bit more than care and concern for fellow men and women. I feel like there's a bit of jealousy or a little bit of envy, or the idea that like this random chick that doesn't know anything is able to make all this money, and this person, blah, blah, blah. I feel like there's an envy or jealousy driven aspect there. I could be wrong. This is a feeling I have.
Maybe you're right, but also, sorry about the runny nose, but also I feel like with young men specifically, and it's true, like now in a way that probably we haven't seen, I mean, maybe since the Crusades, we have like young men taking up the banner of like sexual morality, right? They're policing these thoughts and stuff. I feel like it is self-interested in a way. I think for a lot of these young men, they're looking at these women and they're thinking, man, I would love to date you, but I don't want to date you as an OnlyFans model. So I think there's like, there's this condemnation, but it's also born out of, this is what women in my generation are increasingly looking up to and becoming, and they don't want that. They want their dating prospects, I guess, to not be on OnlyFans, which I don't think is unreasonable.
I've heard this narrative before. I have never met a guy that would even be in the same league or have the opportunity to date a girl that's successful on OnlyFans and like turns her down. I've never seen that happen in my life. That might be a thing, but it feels like generally the circle of people that are complaining about these types of women have zero overlap with like the actual people that could date these types of women. That just is generally the case. But I'm being a little bit mean there when I say that, but that just seems to be the case.
But I mean, there are, I know the type of person that you're referring to who would maybe like be very judgmental, condemning them, but also like, let's be real. If that woman were like, hey, do you want to be my boyfriend, then jump on that. But there are, I mean, people like Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh, they're happily married, they're fathers. I think there is a version of a man out there who, yes, for, moral reasons is against it.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, like Knowles and Walsh are, no offense to your ilk, these are very, very far right people. So they probably would pair off with also women that share like similar social values. So I would hope that if you meet a woman, like for instance, if you meet a woman that goes to your church, that's part of your community, you start talking about she has an OnlyFans, that'd probably be a really big deal. And I imagine that would probably not be okay. So yeah, there's gonna be some people that definitely have no preference for that at all. Backing up for just real quick on the OnlyFans thing. Something again that I have a really hard time sorting out is like you mentioned that OnlyFans and online porn presents like a unique challenge to people today and the impacts on us. I don't disagree. I just wonder sometimes how much the internet has changed everything, and then from the internet, people can pick and choose like whatever their particular pet project is to say this is actually the worst thing, when in reality the broad thing is like the internet. So like a long time ago, there was this guy called Jack Thompson, who was attorney that hated violence in video games, and he like went on a crusade against it, and he was like, this is where all the problems of the world are coming from video games. Or you've got people on Twitter today, and white supremacy and Nazi talk is the worst thing in the internet, and it's empowering everybody to turn everybody secretly into Nazis. Or for Redpillers, it's OnlyFans has ruined the modern woman, and now women eat hot chip and they can't even cook anymore, and blah blah blah. There are some things about the internet that we know are really bad, and there's some things we don't know, and I feel like we harp more on the latter than the former. So for instance, for OnlyFans, and even for impacts on relationships, I did a debate a while ago on this. It's really hard to find data on like how does actually affect us. Right. I feel like there are a lot of people that make a lot of really strong claims that the data doesn't support. Not to say that doesn't have really big impacts on us. It might just be really hard to study. But one thing I do know is something that's really well researched is social media is horrible for young people, especially teenage girls. It fucks your mind so much. And people will come out and say things like, well, I'm just against OnlyFans because I don't like to commodify women, or I don't like how women are making this, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, why not say something about like the horrible impacts of social media on students? Because it's a really big deal. And that's really well researched, super empirically validated. I feel like the selective focus, again, is one of those things that makes me wonder, yeah. And the fact that it's like, this is like the internet is mind all of us. And there are different facets of the internet that mind, but it's not just because it's not just because it's a thing. It's because now we're like connected to a billion different things at the fingertips, you know, every single second of the day. And that's like having a lot of wide-reaching impacts on our lives.